Bills head coach Joe Brady speaking at the Combine yesterday. Good morning, Jeremy and Joe, on this cold, wintry Wednesday. They're all wintry these days. The unrelenting winter continues, but we're happy to have you with us. Good morning here on WGR. Talking Combine and getting ready for the Sabres to play tonight. I know Joe Marino and Locked On Bills podcast. You'll be locked in 7 o'clock tonight for Sabres Devils. You're coming back to this hockey team, Joe. I know you're ready for this.
I'll be honest with you, man. It's been tough not having the Sabres games on. It's been a nice little filler to my evening several times a week, and I've missed it. So I'm excited for them to get back out there, continue this playoff push, and act like I know what the heck's going on.
Yeah. Well, tonight they're in New Jersey, 7 o'clock. You can, of course, hear the game here on WGR. All right, Joe, Combine Week. You know, you're a guy who's been in the scouting world before. This is a big weekend for scouts to get together, to do interviews, to check numbers, you know, whether it's 3 cones or arm length or anything like that. What do you think of the Combine, like big picture, and what do you feel like these teams are here to learn about these players as they go through their interviews and all of the workouts and measurements and crazy stuff that gets a lot of attention, of course, in the NFL world?
Well, I certainly enjoy the process. I love being able to get a feel for body types and athleticism and getting everyone under the same circumstances doing the same stuff. You know, once they get away from Indy, they're at their individual places, and you hear about wind assisted and it's a fast track. You know, like, all right, show up. Everyone's under the same circumstances. Let's see how you do. I love that. I love seeing dudes compete, and it's a fun part of it. I know for the teams, it's a lot more about the medical piece and then doing interviews, although some teams would love to let you know that they don't want to be there and they don't want to let that influence their process too much. And I passionately disagree with that. I think you should take advantage of more information. And if you don't know how to use the information, then you got to ask yourself some questions about how you internalize it. But the Bills are there. I'm glad they're there. And, you know, I think ultimately what my approach to kind of scouting players for the NFL draft is that it's risk assessment, and you want to try to give yourself the most favorable opportunity to be right about a player. And we have data that goes across decades, and you know that if a offensive lineman is going to be good, usually these things are true about their size and athleticism, and I think that gives you the best opportunity to be correct as opposed to counting on exceptions where guys don't meet certain thresholds and you don't have a great case study, or you don't have a great inventory of success to point to based on them not meeting thresholds. So I think it's a huge part of really allowing your board to stabilize and get those tiebreakers figured out. And then, you know, if you need to ask deeper questions based on how something doesn't match up with what was on film, then you have the opportunity to do it. So I think it's extremely valuable. And I know that my things that I'm looking for are a little bit different than teams, but it's all part of the overall picture that you're trying to paint for these prospects.
Real quick on that. Is 3-cone the hack I've seen? I feel like I saw somebody post, maybe it's offensive linemen specifically, anybody doing really well in the 3-cone, there's like an 84% chance they become a long-time NFL starter in the league on the line?
Yeah, so on the offensive line, the short shuttle is really important one. I think it's under a 4.3 or a 4.2. Guys that just go underneath that, the success rate is really, really high. And then for edge rushers, the 3-cone being under 7 seconds, it's a really, really successful thing if you can hit that clip based on your chances of being a good pass rusher. So yes, those are big time qualifiers. It's
funny, Joe, like as you lay that out, like those two things being important, I feel like I'm thinking back to the time Tom Brady was on with Colin Cowherd talking about how, you know, if you rank the quarterbacks 1 through 32, you should also be doing that with the offensive coordinators 1 through 32. And what the Combine and these tests do, while any GM would say like, hey, the tape is the tape, you're also trying to pick through that maybe if a guy does something wrong, it's because he hasn't been coached the right way, and maybe his support system's not there. And if he does this one test well, you say, like, all right, well, the athletic ability is in there. Let's mold this piece of clay. Let's get this, like, this stock and make sure we can grow it into something much, much better. So, like, I know that people like to sometimes poo-poo the Combine, but to me, the like you said, you're adding information and you're digging into your own process as a way to get the most out of it.
Yeah, no question. And I do think that it does kind of open your eyes, like you mentioned there, to other possibilities where, maybe there was something about their situation in college that didn't allow them to showcase their full skill set. And this will give you some clues and indicators as to maybe where they're more capable than they've shown, been able to, given the opportunity to show that they can do. And so, this can open up your mind to more possibilities. You got to be careful not to get honeypotted, right? Because there's countless examples of guys that, check all the boxes in terms of size and athleticism. They're just not very good football players. So you got to weed through that piece as well. But yes, it definitely can open your eyes to some new possibilities.
And then there's the opposite end of that. And given what you said a little bit earlier about like the measurements and whatnot, do you have this, not Bills because he'll be long gone, but do you have an opinion on Ruben Bane? Because this week, I wonder how much he'll get talked about, the Miami edge rusher, because he's awesome, but he's got, the shortest arms we've ever seen for a player this good?
Boy, it's the conversations about the arm length there have been pretty significant. It's funny, I just recorded an episode of Locked On NFL Scouting with Kyle Krabs, and we started talking about Ruben Bane, and he's not expected to work out, and I don't think anyone's really concerned about the athletic profile. He's very athletic, but it is a very competitive top-of-the-edge rusher situation, and so you'd love to see him go out there and try to do something that would maybe tip the scales in his favor. But the conversation with Ruben Bane is going to be arm length, and Kyle and I got into this conversation. I said, all right, if they're less than 32-inch arms, what successful stories can you tell me about of sub 32-inch arm edge rushers that are good in the NFL? And we went through the inventory, like dating back to 2006, and we found like Carl Lawson is like 35 and some change, or 31 and some change. And he fell a little bit in the draft. He had some medical stuff. I think he's been at times a pretty good pass rusher, but he hasn't really sustained his level of play. Marcus Golden was probably the best example we could find of sub 32-inch arms, and then Trey Hendrickson is 32 on the dot. And so we'll see where those numbers come in. I hope to be surprised, and then inevitably what's going to happen is regardless of whatever number this is, he will go to his pro day, and it will be a lot better because that's just what happens, right? So be ready for that. But, the reality is not a lot of sub 32-inch arms edge rushers that have been very successful. And if I'm choosing between a David Bailey or Ruben Bane, I might go with the guy with the longer arms where there's a lot more success that I can point to.
Joe Marino of the Locked On Bills podcast talking Combine with us. We heard from the GM and the coach yesterday. And one thing, Joe, I brought up as a point yesterday, I feel like the GM maybe said something to this effect about their defense. And as they start to build this thing out, they're going to get a lot of new pieces. But they don't start at a baseline zero. They have some talented pieces they can use. And I'm thinking primarily about the return of Ed Oliver and Michael Hoyt. Like, to me, we're all in our heads. We have this vision of the Bills' front seven that needs to be overhauled from the playoffs and from the end of the season, and that's true. But that overhaul starts with the injection of two really nice pieces so far. And in terms of Oliver, he's one of the faces of the defense. How do you like the idea of the Jim Leonhard defense for him, and just how big of an acquisition it is to have him in it? Like, if he weren't on the team and he just jumped onto the team, which is kind of one way to think about it from being injured for basically a full year, how much of a boost will Ed Oliver be and in this system itself?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it, and I can point to some very specific examples of body types that are very similar to Ed Oliver that is really good in this type of system. And I go right to Denver, and I point to Zach Allen and the type of production he's been able to have. And Zach Allen, they don't ask him to go in there and two-gap, and play and defend the run. They ask him to penetrate, right? They put him next to a nose tackle like DJ Jones. They put him next to a good five-tech and John Franklin Myers, or a good rush outside linebackers like a John Cooper, and they let him go. I think about the Rams with Kobe Turner, another player very similar, like around 6'2", around 290 pounds, not a lot of length, sub 33-inch arms. And he's another player that's able to be free and just, do what he does. And I think you'll see Ed Oliver have that opportunity under Jim Leonhard. So I don't find myself concerned about it. I know that you might look at his skill set and think, all right, 3 technique and an even front defense. Well, he can play 4-eye and an odd front as well. And I think there's plenty of success to point to there. And so I'm very curious to see how his game evolves. And then, Michael Hoyt, I think, is extremely clean as a projection to this this defense as well. And it was cool to listen to him on Eric Wood's podcast talk about his excitement for it and how he actually thinks that it simplifies a lot for the entire defense and guys can play a little faster. And, I think those are going to be two foundational pieces. I think Greg Rousseau will be a very clean projection. And, you mentioned that they do have some foundational pieces. This corner tandem of Benford and Harrison is exciting. Bishop is exciting. So they got some blanks to fill in around those guys, and I'm not trying to make light of that. But I think we have to be careful to not be too concerned about everything that they need. And at the same time, let's acknowledge what's in place that I think is a strong nucleus. And I think in some ways those players can elevate in this new defense under Jim Leonhard as things are simplified.
How serious do you take the conversation surrounding Taron Johnson and safety, which Bane did not shut down yesterday? Yeah. They have Cap committed to him. Guys have done it before, corner to safety. Does he strike you as a guy that would be able to do it?
Well, so I don't love the idea. Here's the thing. On Taron Johnson, I'm concerned about him in the slot too. So I don't love the idea of playing him at safety because I don't think he's a player that, as routes elongate down the field, that he's ever shown more comfort with. I think he likes to play kind of tighter, driving on things, playing forward. And now all of a sudden I'm going to put him in deep alignments and ask him to play half field or quarters or, it's a really different situation that I don't think has been something he's been super successful with. And then, of course, like the fitting the run is very different from depth as opposed to, kind of in that overhang slot type position. So I have concerns about that projection, but also I'm concerned about the player he's been in the slot as well. So what this comes down to for me, and kind of reading between the lines of what Brandon Beane said, is that they're trying to find ways to salvage this, right? They're kind of stuck here. And I think it would behoove them, along with Terrell Bernard, to kind of figure out how you can get some return on what these players are and the commitment that you've made to them. And Brandon Beane actually, as part of these quotes, he said, quote, "We're trying to figure out every piece and the value." And he also mentioned that, specifically regarding Taron and moving to safety, he says he's a good football player, and so you never want to rule anything out if that's the best position for him after a couple of weeks with Jim. And so what I look at here is that they have not a great opportunity right now to get out of the deal. They could cut him, and it would free up about $1.9 million in cap, but it would then also accumulate $9.5 million in dead cap. But after June 1st, they could get $8.7 million in 2026 cap savings. Now they get 2.7 in dead cap this year, 6.7 next year. But that's not nothing. Like that 8.7 would matter, especially for like in-season operating funds. So when I hear, see what it looks like for a few weeks, I think about OTAs and the spring ramp up. And then, hey, by June 1st, like you need to know, is this going to be a player that you can salvage and play more in a safety role, or is it time to cut ties? So that's my reading between the lines, is they need to get some clarity on what Taron can offer this defense. And if they like it, they stick with it. If they don't, they have an opportunity to get out of it favorably after 6-1. But, for as much as I am concerned about the projection to safety, I'm also concerned about the slot and kind of the age that he's shown over the last couple of seasons.
Joe Marino of the Locked On Bills podcast. Joe, before we get to some maybe draft ideas, Alec Anderson and Fedarian Mathis both back with the team on small deals. As we wait for Connor McGovern and David Edwards, Anderson to me looks like it's probably backup money. If he starts, I know they might have some faith in him. He's been here for a while. McGovern, did the news on Tyler Linderbaum kind of shake you off of a McGovern idea? Because the Ravens yesterday revealed they offered him a market-setting contract, and yet he's still going to go to market. So the center position likely explodes with Linderbaum, and I wonder, anything with Connor McGovern is probably waiting on that to happen, and I feel like it's only going one direction.
Yeah, the center market has had a big surge with Creed Humphrey, and then you had a big deal with Cam Jurgens and Drew Dahlman last offseason, and now Linderbaum's going to get over $20 million a season. And so, yeah, I think that's domino one because he's going to get all the money. He's going to push the top of the market. Young player, right, coming out of his rookie deal, first-round pick, he's terrific, probably the best center in the league. And there's a lot of teams that need centers, so I think he'll get what he's looking for. I think that's for domino one for then Connor McGovern, who I think is clearly the second best center on the market, a very attractive player. He's been durable. He's not only not allowed a sack over the last 2 years at center, he's only allowed 2 quarterback hits. This guy's been terrific. But I don't think he's quite in that stratosphere of Linderbaum. But I think Linderbaum helps set that market for McGovern. And, McGovern has openly said that he took less to come to Buffalo the first time around. I think he's looking for a big payday, and I think he'll find what he's looking for. But to your point, that first domino being Linderbaum. Anderson back in the fray, like you mentioned, doesn't scream starter money. In fact, the Spot Rack reported today that it's 1 year, $2.5 million, which is even less than the 1 year $3 million that was initially reported. And then, of course, the RFA tender was $3.5 million. So I think he'll be in the mix. I think they're going to have to figure it out at one position, center or guard, like with some in-house options, maybe a rookie, a modest vet acquisition. I don't think they're going to be able to put big money in both spots. So I think Anderson helps you as an option there. And at a minimum, I think you like him as a reserve. I think he's been a fine reserve for this team. And then Phi Mathis, I haven't been overly enamored with what he's done so far in Buffalo. I think he's shown a soft anchor against the run. I don't think he has much juice as a pass rusher. But if there is something that is intriguing is that, this was the number 47 pick in 2022 out of Alabama. This style of defense that I think Jim Leonhard's going to bring to Buffalo is a lot more in line with what he played at in Alabama. And then, looking at his career, he tore meniscus in his knee his first game. Then the second season he had some injury, I think it was a calf, that put him on IR for quite a bit. And then, regime change in 2024 in Washington, and he's lost in the sauce. Now, I'm concerned that he couldn't make the Jets last year, and then he spent weeks available before the Bills signed him to the practice squad. But, he plays hard, and this is more the style of defense that he played at Alabama. It's a minimum type deal. I don't think, there's $25,000 guaranteed. It's not like they made a huge commitment on a 1 year deal, but he'll be back in the mix. And, maybe there is a little bit of upside to tap into based on getting back to a style of defense that made him a top 50 pick.
Quickly on that position, if Anderson, who's back, is competing with, let's say McGovern leaves and it's him and Cedric Van Pran Granger, and they just decide that's a competition for center, we're going to go with the better of the two. Like, how okay would you be with the idea of that? Because I think if I remember right, you liked Van Pran Granger a lot when they drafted him, right?
Yeah, and I do. I'm intrigued there. I like that he's had a few years to kind of incubate and learn Josh, right, and protection schemes, and I think that would be great. I think if that works out, that would be great. But Bean needs some hits, right? Like in the draft, you go back to that 2022 class, and we have a lot of or maybe a 24 class. Excuse me, we have a lot of questions, right? Like so far, it looks like Cole Bishop and maybe Ray Davis is a depth player. You don't like a lot of what you're getting out of that class. If you get a starting center in the 5th round, that's really going to help tell a better story. So I think he'll potentially be given that opportunity if McGovern leaves, and then maybe you also bring in a modest veteran. There's some intriguing veterans that I think the Bills could bring in to maybe add to that mix, and then you still kind of have that left guard to sort out as well. So definitely going to be some shakeups with this offensive line, something that's been pretty stable. But at least if it is Cedric Van Pran Granger, it's not somebody who's a rookie or new to the team. It would be a player that has some familiarity, and hopefully that gives him an upper hand to step in, and it would be great for the Bills to find an answer like that at a position like center.
Talking with Joe Marino, Locked on Bills podcast. We usually talk to Joe on Wednesdays at 8 o'clock, and now it's Wednesday at 7 o'clock. We might kind of stay in this spot as well going forward. So if this is your first time hearing Joe, get to know him. Joe, are you developing draft crushes yet? Is it too early? How many guys have you got in this draft coming in?
Not as many as you're going to want me to say, Jeremy. I've been tied up in this free agency stuff. I've done all the quarterbacks I'm going to do. I've done several running backs. I watched Carnell Tate, so I'm trying to get caught up on the draft a little bit. Certainly, the combine will be a very helpful piece to kind of make sure that I'm pointing in the right direction. So
then how about how about the free agent crushes? I know you've got a couple on the defensive line.
Yeah, I really do. I think there's an opportunity with the Bills, like, to take advantage of some veterans on the market at the nose tackle, like a Crisis Tonga or a Roy Lopez or a DJ Reader. I think those are going to be there's going to be some value there to fill their nose tackle spot. Arnold Ebiketie is the name off edge rusher that I think just has a lot of upside. That his efficiency metrics were better than any of the players in Atlanta, but they were obviously kind of burdened to play their younger players, and I think there's some untapped potential there with Ebiketie that I like. I'd love to see either Caden Ellis or Leo Chenal added at linebacker. I think it's exactly the type of player that they need. So those defensive players, I think they'll find some value there. And course, I'm very anxious to see what they do at wide receiver, whether that's kind of going all in on an Alec Pierce or they make a trade. But I think there's going to be plenty of different pathways they can pursue to get after those things. Meanwhile, you can't forget about the need for 2 starters on the offensive line and a safety. So, Brandon Bede's gonna earn his paycheck here in the coming weeks.
We've got a poll on Twitter about A.J. Brown. I'm sure like every article you see is A.J. Brown going to be traded? And the Bills and the Patriots are two teams consistently mentioned for him. How do you like that idea if the Bills were to trade for A.J. Brown? I mean, there's, of course, like the headache part of it. The Eagles have a little bit of a headache. They have won the Super Bowl with him. He's been great. How much time is left? How much money's committed? How about the fit specifically? And then, of course, like the bigger picture. How do you feel about it?
Well, I think it's a super absorbable contract for the Bills. They take on $7 million in 2026 cap, and I think that's extremely digestible. He turns 29 in June, and he's entering year 1 of a 3-year deal. You're probably, if you trade for him, you're probably thinking he's going to play 2 of those seasons. And I think that's what gives me some confidence if this is the path that the Bills go down, is that you're probably going to get best behavior for a couple of years. I think that's kind of the story with a lot of the receivers. And I don't know that A.J. Brown's like been like a bad guy or anything like that. I think that he's maybe taken some exception with maybe how the offense has functioned, and it's a frustrating offense. Like, if does anybody watch the Eagles? I mean,
don't they fire their coordinator every year? I mean, he's mad, and they're also mad.
Yeah, it's not been very stable. Jalen Hurts sometimes looks like he's the greatest quarterback in the league, and sometimes he looks like Justin Fields, with the Jets this past year. It's hard to reconcile. And so I think he comes in and he would immediately give you everything you want out of that X receiver position, which, of course, is a staple of a Joe Brady, Sean Payton offense, where it's Marcus Colston or Cortland Sutton or Michael Thomas. Like, you would firmly check that box, and I love that idea. Like, there's no guesswork there. And A.J. Brown's A-list talent. Like, watch him play. He's really dynamic. He's the kind of guy that can take over moments. He's unbelievably physical and good with the ball in his hands. He would be a heck of an addition. And I don't know that it's going to cost you that much. Does a 2 in Keon get that done? I wonder what the package looks like. I'm sure that the Eagles would want more. And it was interesting kind of foiling Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni's comments about it yesterday. Nick Sirianni was not committing to anything, acting like you don't even know if you're going to be alive tomorrow. And then, Nick Sirianni or Howie Roseman talks about you don't get better by trading away your great players. So I think he was a little bit more equipped to negotiate through the press conference. But it would be a huge dead cap hit for Philly. They'd have to eat $43 million this year. So there's a lot to play into it, but I'm pretty open to the idea for Buffalo, especially if they don't have to give up that much to get him.
Joe Marino, Locked on Bills podcast, joining us here on the Western Hotline. Joe, thanks again. We'll talk next week.
All right, guys. Thank you.
You can find everything Joe does at thejoemarino.com. Tons of great Bills content for you to check in on for the Locked on Bills podcast, the Bill Squad show he does with me and Jerry Ostrowski. He's got all 22 stuff. He's got a text club. He's got everything going on. So if you like Joe, thejoemarino.com. 803-0550, our phone number. A.J. Brown. You can't find, Joe, an article about A.J. Brown that doesn't just Control F Buffalo. It's going to be there every time. Every time. $43 million dead cap makes me think the cost is high because you have to pay for them to take that hit, which is tough. Any fear of trading a first to the Eagles because whenever that happens, that first finds its way to 11th overall? They do that all the time.
If they traded for Brown for 26 when they take 26 in their own pick and go up to get Carnell Tate.
Maybe.
Get the next A.J. Brown.
Joe likes Carnell Tate. I've talked to him about Carnell Tate. Anyway, off we go. Sal will join us at 8 o'clock to recap yesterday at the NFL Combine. Things keep rolling today. He's in Indianapolis, and we are here in Buffalo and in Rochester on WGR.